All right, I'm here with Nathan, also known as Fancy. If you guys listen to the upcoming podcast that I'll be uploading, you'll get to hear a really nice long interview where we have a great talk. But I'm also exposing him here on YouTube, and so go ahead and say hello to the viewers.
Hello, everyone. Excellent.
Well, first of all, we're going to start with the talk we usually have. How did you learn about Occupy Detroit?
I'd been tracking the output from Anonymous on YouTube and various other locations for since I became aware of them, which was shortly after they took down PayPal and Visa, and hearing about them through their support of WikiLeaks. So I had my, ear to the ground, listening for what they were putting out, and because once I saw the actions that they'd taken, I understood their power and their direction, and it aligns with a lot of my interests and my views. So it was natural for me to gravitate towards that. And I'd been hearing that they were planning major operations since spring that were to begin later on in the year and being implemented in various stages. So that when I saw Occupy Wall Street begin to happen, I immediately understood that this was part of that agenda, and that this was going to be really big. I didn't understand quite that it was going to be global, but I knew that there would be branches of it here and in all major cities. And so I moved, as soon as I saw Occupy Wall Street go up, to alert some of my leftist friends, one of whom is a IWW member. So I started ringing the alarm bell with the IWW, letting them know that they needed to be ready to be mobilized, because big things were in the works. Because of that contact, they in turn let me know that a group here locally known as Macawi, which works as a socialist group, at least that's my understanding, that they're a socialist group, and that they work heavily in the foreclosure aspect of things, and have been active in that position for quite some time. So the first meetings concerning whether Detroit would become involved and start its branch of the movement, those conversations began with some of their meetings, and I was at the first one of those meetings. And then from there, I volunteered to be on the very first locations working group, which was responsible for assessing and suggesting possible locations for our protest to be. We presented these options to the first General Assembly. The Grand Circus Park location was the one we felt was really best, and it became immediately apparent to everyone else involved that it was the only site worth real consideration for a whole number of reasons, a whole host of reasons, not the least of which was visibility. As it happens, Hazen Pingree, his statue, lies at one of the corners of that park, and his political stance and the placard under that statue really is also in alignment with this movement. And he was a governor and mayor of Michigan and Detroit, respectively, and just a very small piece on him is that he really was one of the very first people to start calling to the general public attention back in, I believe, the 1890s or 80s that the dangers presented by the concentration of wealth, tax inequity, and corporations, and was really instrumental in kind of beating them back at that time. So he's a natural hero for the movement. From the point at which we selected the park, we then moved in, and the park went through several different evolutions as to how things were being managed, the resources were being controlled, and how the kitchen and the health station and comfort stations were all set up, and I played a part in those actions as well. Although I still continue to hold down a 40-plus hour work week, and I have no life anymore outside of this movement and my job. That's a common thing for people with this movement.
Another fun thing about that location is it was right across the street from a Bank of America branch.
Yeah. There were a lot of really great things about that location, but the movement is so much more than the park. The movement is the people, not a location.
Sure.
So, there are factions, I guess is the best way to phrase this, that feel that the occupy of the park and the public space is fundamental to this movement, and I really strongly believe that the people and their will is what's at the core of this movement, and space is irrelevant.
Absolutely. Now, as things are evolving, we're moving in a new direction, obviously. The movement seems to be, kind of going through some growing pains in some ways, and at the same time, I've noticed that, there's many different ideologies, represented within this group of people. Many, there's your communists, your socialists, your anarchists, and somehow, for the most part, they managed to get along fairly well. I haven't really seen any complaints from, any kind of ideological disputes. But we get into the internal conflicts that any large group of people that's still trying to kind of learn, how to, govern itself goes through. And, do you see that, any divisions that, that have come up, do you feel that we can overcome them, and how would you suggest?
Of course, there are divisions that have come up. It's natural. But the fact of the matter is we all showed up here for the same reasons, and I think people need to check themselves a little bit and set their egos aside, and just continue to work for progress. I think that all the solutions are based on sweat equity. What you put in determines your involvement, and that's really the bottom line. Your involvement determines your involvement. There are a lot of what we've been terming slacktivists around that have high intentions and carry through with no action. And it is my contention that you're responsible for putting forth labor in line with whatever your ideological position and stance is in order to achieve the goals that you feel are important. If you are not contributing labor and you're only contributing words, you are not contributing.
Yeah, that's actually kind of at the core that I think, and this is not just Occupy Detroit, there's always been a division that I'm noticing across the world in different Occupy movements between those who camp and those who don't. And obviously there's no camp now, but there's still, I've noticed, kind of a remnant of that same feeling, is, as you said, it's the people who, they feel have done a lot of the, pulling their sleeves up and getting to work, and then the people who just kind of seem to be the critics on the sidelines. Can you elaborate at all on what you saw between the divisions between the camp and the non-camp?
Yeah, the people in the camp, and this has been where a lot of the division in Detroit came from, felt really undersupported. We begged and begged for help, and we did get some, but we were always shorthanded. I myself, aside from putting in my time at work, toward the movement also while I'm at my job, was spending every waking hour into very late nights defending myself and those I care about and are working with in this movement in camp. Basically, we were fighting drug addicts. Because we were in public space, we could not, and we were so shorthanded, we couldn't control what the population was in that space. And there's an enormous homeless population in Detroit, and a lot of them have drug abuse problems, and those persons were very disruptive and at times physically dangerous to occupiers. But it was a situation which was very difficult to contain.
And stressful.
Extremely stressful. So this is the root of much of the division, is that the campers felt undersupported, although the physical and cash donations were tremendous. More importantly, we needed bodies. We needed feet in the streets, and we could get people to turn out for marches, but we couldn't get a reliable security team up and working. And a lot of the people that came to this movement, even though their intentions were very good, don't have the correct training and experience to peacefully subdue these situations which were arising constantly. There was one morning where I was having my first cup of coffee, trying to get the sleep out of my eyes, and a fight broke out. There was a homeless gentleman who came after one of the other homeless gentlemen who had joined our movement and was working in part of our safety team. Came charging after him with a weapon. There was a struggle, and then after those persons were separated, a third party came along, and I had to jump in between him and another person and disarm him, and then go to work. So, but this is just one example of what we were dealing with constantly. And being so undersupported with actual physical work led to feelings of resentment, and it also led to burnout among campers, because when you have maybe a dozen people that are really solidly committed and committing to action to make this thing happen, and we have all this peanut gallery on the sidelines telling us how we're doing it wrong, but not willing to actually come and help us improve it, it's I think very natural to develop feelings of resentment around that.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also just it creates a division also in the fact that those people can't even understand. It's difficult for you to relate to them. It's just like, say dealing with a veteran who's trying to speak to a civilian who's never been in a violent situation in their lives. The under siege feeling that you get, and combined, I always felt safe in camp, but there was definitely an effort that had to go into that, and it was a constant awareness that that effort had to be maintained. It reminded me of, we're at our headquarters, but we're still at war. It
was very much a foxhole mentality that developed,
right?
And that many of us didn't know each other prior to this movement. But when you look up every day from your toil, and you are shoulder to shoulder next to the same people who you can see are working just as hard as you and putting forth just as much effort, you naturally gain affinity for those people. It's how humans bond, especially males tend to bond through labor. So, but that's not exclusive to, and I don't want to make these generalities. Many of the people that I've really grown to love through this are women. So, and a lot of the core group that were working the hardest in camp have been women.
Yeah, I have to say I've been very impressed with a lot of the girls out there, the Sarah Coffees and the Lucianas and the, these really tough, in some cases diminutive little girls. I mean, I don't mean little in the young sense, just small girls who are standing up to really big guys. And, and we've talked about the diversity in the situation. So I was actually speaking to the gentleman just a moment earlier. About that was that it's really a melding pot of so many people in one spot. But before we get into, that, I think we're kind of getting to a heart of a matter that I think a lot of the people in the movement really need to hear about, which is that it's difficult for groups to relate to one another when they're not living in the same environment, when that environment is drastically different. And it's also difficult for people who are in that environment to have people who don't understand, at least from your perspective, could never really understand because they're not out there every day. There's the threat of violence, but there's also the forever being cold. Like you always feel like you're cold.
Always cold, always wet.
Yeah.
Never have, even though we were putting out a ton of food, too busy working to eat.
Right.
So undernourished, undersupported, cold, sick often, and under constant threat of violence and constant threat of banditry. So yeah, it's a difficult situation, and it is hard to be able to relate to people who have not had that experience. Just how stressful and hard it really is. I do understand that not everybody has the capability to be out there in the park. That there are people that are too busy just trying to hold their life together, that are under such duress just doing that they can't dedicate the time that others could. But what that also means is you don't get to tell others what to do.
Absolutely. It would be unfair to say otherwise. And that's something I say repeatedly is that, if you can't be out there all the time, like I couldn't. I could only camp on weekends, and I could only show up to so many days per week because of my situation at home. But I also tempered that with the understanding that for me to show up in a position where there are other people that are dealing with this issue that you're talking about every day, to try to push them around or, to try to be assertive about anything is really unfair. And that, I had no problem getting anybody who was a regular camper listening to me, but I also approached it in a very different way. I think that there's kind of maybe a resentment or even a jealousy, to some degree, coming out of some of these people who can only be there, like on the internet, and then they feel left out. But it's hard for them to really grasp that, like, whenever I was at camp, it's like an internet dead zone. Those people don't even exist to you. They're not there. So it's not like they're going out of their way at the camp to say, well, screw the people on the internet. It's that they don't even have time to think about that. If you're not part of the situation as it is right now on the ground, then you're not even factored in. And it's not because they're trying to exclude you. It's because you don't exist to them. I
think that's an excellent point. We didn't have very much computer capability in camp, and the computers that were present were all stolen. Pretty rapidly. Phones were stolen constantly. You couldn't charge your phone because if you left it out of your sight, it would disappear instantly. So, dealing with that level of banditry, you can't provide the infrastructure because it all walks away. And so, it wasn't that we didn't have a desire to communicate with those people and interact with them. It was that we couldn't maintain